welcome back, everybody. As we take our overview of Christianity, one thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of dig deeper into the history of this faith compared to the other world religions that we've looked at, mostly because Christianity is the dominant religion not only in the service area here, but in America. And it's a really fascinating story that a lot of people, a lot of Christians are unfamiliar with. So we'll go ahead and jump in. And in purple here on the map, this represents the Roman Empire, where the Roman Empire was in the 1st century Common Era. Now, way over here, this is where we're going to focus. This is when Israel had been conquered, and it was a Roman province, part of the Roman Empire, and it was called Judea. And it gets that sound there from the tribe of Judah. If you remember that from the overview of Judaism, that's where that comes from. Now, a lot of people today are really unfamiliar, don't really know what the Jewish people thought about being under Roman rule. And the answer is they hated it. And in fact, hate really is not a strong enough word. So a lot of people today wonder why they hate it so much? For different reasons. One of which is that the empire required, the Roman Empire, if you were part of the empire, you were required to use Roman coins. And those coins would have stamped on them the head, profile of the emperor, and or signs of the zodiac, right? Just astrological signs that we still have with us today. And the Jewish people, that went against Jewish teachings to walk around and to handle those coins. They hated that. As well, the Roman emperor was viewed as a god. So the Romans would worship and view the emperor as a god. And in these different parts of the empire, they had to make tribute to the emperor. So what that means is that there would be statues or banners that bear a likeness of the emperor. And during the course of your day-to-day life, especially during festivals, you would have to make tribute to the likeness of the emperor, whether it was a banner or a statue. And all of this went against Jewish teachings, and this is idol worship, just like holding the coins, right? It was forbidden. Plus, the Romans taxed everybody in the empire. So the Jewish people hated being ruled by the Romans. So some groups of Jewish people, for example, the Sadducees, they tried to make the best of a bad situation and got along with the Romans as best they could. Other groups, such as the Essenes, fled into the wilderness and lived out in desert communities. You might be familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's an example of a community that just had enough and they went off to live on their own. Other groups, such as the Sicarii, were in revolt. What the Sicarii did is that they would get together and they would go into a crowded marketplace, and if there were any Jews who were collaborating with the Romans, then in a very crowded setting, the Sicarii would, take a dagger out of their pocket and walk up behind the person and then stab the person and then flee. So it was a very tense day-to-day life for the Jewish people. In addition to all of that, day-to-day life, in Judea was marked by poverty, hunger, and debt. Now, a lot of people today say, well, how poor were the Jews living in Judea in the first century? And the Gospel according to Luke, you might be familiar with the parable, the saying that Jesus said regarding if the salt has lost its savor. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, right? What do you do with when the salt has lost its savor? Well, you throw it out. And for a lot of readers today, you're like, salt can't lose its saltiness because it's salt, and you can't throw in it. And that saying that really doesn't make sense to us. But this is an example of how poor the Jews were in Judea. Now, during this time, in order to get salt, what you would have to do is you would either have to buy it, which took a lot of money, or you would have to trade for it. You might not have to trade for it. So then what you would have to do is you would have to go get salt on your own. So what you would do is you would go over to the Dead Sea, which would be over here, it's not on the map, which is an inland lake that had been part of the Mediterranean Sea, but then it became landlocked. It's very, very salty. So what you would do is you would take your pot, right, and down to the shore of the Dead Sea, and you would scrape it along the water line, and you would scrape up sand and mud and bits of seaweed, right, stuff like that. And then what you would do is you would take that back to your home. Then you would fill that up with water, and then you would boil it. And as the water boiled, right, it would go down, and then what would be left around the rim would be salt. So then you take a spoon and you would scrape that salt around off the edge of the pot, right? And that's how you would get salt. Yeah, that's tough. And so after a while, you would keep adding water and water to that mixture and boiling and reboiling until all of the salt had been boiled out. And then what you would do is you would take that and dump it out and then go back to the Dead Sea and get some more, right? So a lot of people wonder, why were the Jews during this time so poor? Well, they were being taxed by Rome. In addition, they had to pay temple tax. Now, the Jews were forbidden to use Roman coinage in the temple, so they had to take the Roman coins to the money changers, and then they had to pay a fee to have them changed into Jewish coinage to use in the temple, right? So they were being taxed, and then they were being swindled by the money changers, and they hated this. As a result, day-to-day life was marked by hunger. So in order to make ends meet, in order to avoid starving, what was common was for people to fall into debt. And if you ever read in the New Testament, if you hear the reference to a servant, right? Today we would call those servants slaves, because what people had to do to support themselves when they fell on hard times, because there's no such thing as welfare, right, or unemployment compensation. There's no institutions like that. So what people had to do, they had to sell themselves into slavery for a period of 7 years. Yeah, just to make ends meet. And oftentimes that cycle of debt would be ongoing. 7 years, and then you'd be freed, and then you would still have, debts outstanding. Yeah. Now, we can add to everything we've been talking about in the first century CE of Judea, the Masonic Age. So what does that refer to? The Jews during this time were expecting a Messiah to come. And if you remember from the overview of Judaism, the example of the Messiah was King David, right? King David was not only a political leader, but he was also tested in battle. So the Jews were expecting someone to rise up from the populace, pick up a sword, drive out the Romans, and then reestablish the nation of Israel. And we'll pick up more on the next slide.